Hello, I was a Jewish believer in Jesus for 42 years. I came to this belief at the age of 18, and then 42 years later I decided to just re-examine my faith, not because I didn't believe Jesus was the Messiah, but I just thought it would be interesting to do, to clarify things, make sure I understood everything. And I also wanted to fully understand in detail why Judaism did not accept Jesus as the Messiah. Of course, I did my research, like in common with other Jewish believers, at the age of 18, but I wanted now, 42 years later, as I was more mature, to do a thorough investigation, and this is much easier now because of the internet and the access to so much information and views, and to be able to think round the box fully and explore the concept of the Messiah. And this is what I exactly did for many, many months. And regrettably, and it was with regret and trauma, that I came to realise there was no basis for Jesus being the Messiah in the Hebrew Scriptures. This was a terrible shock to me. I can't begin to tell you how traumatic it was. It was just, there was no basis for it. So after 42 years, I renounced Jesus as the Messiah. I don't consider he has anything to do with Judaism. What I feel strongly about is the fact that there is only one God. Christianity and Messianic Judaism believes that the blood of a human being crucified outside the temple area, the blood of a human being who is supposed to be considered God's son and God, that blood will be an atonement for their sins. God has said in the Jewish scriptures, have nothing to do with human sacrifice. He is also, God does not take flesh. He is an invisible God. He does not take flesh. You shall have no idols. You shall worship no one but me. The second thing that hit me with full force was this concept in Christianity of God creating God, or calling it God's Son, in a human being, killing it, God killing God, and then God raising God from the dead. And for me, as a Jew, this was the final straw. But this was something I had believed in for 42 years, but I hadn't fully grasped the full concept of it. Of course, there are many other reasons which one might say are debatable, but I could see no foundation for Jesus being in the scripture, in the Hebrew scriptures. What I found was that I had been believing in scriptures that were taken and read out of context. That was the first thing. That I was reading prophecy where there was no prophecy. That I was reading things that were just fairy tales. That there was no sense. There was no sense to what I believed. There was no foundation to it. And it is a big subject, and I can't go into it all now, but I just want to know, you might be interested what influenced me. And what influenced me were things you can check out yourself. Jews for Judaism, Jews for Judaism, Outreach Judaism. Listening to these videos by the rabbis, as well as listening to lots of other stuff and doing my research, got me looking at the subjects of the Messiah from a Jewish perspective. Do you know, for 42 years I only heard the Christian perspective. I only heard the Christian view and looked at the scriptures within the context, always in viewing it from the Christian angle. So I was basically believing what the Christian had told me. I hadn't heard the Jewish views. I hadn't heard what the rabbis had to say about these scriptures that I'd been reading. I'd only heard the Christian view. the Messianic Jews' point of view of the reading of these Hebrew scriptures, the way they read them. The non-Jew was reading these scriptures, but I hadn't considered my own religion's view of these scriptures. And this is the most important thing I would ask you to seriously consider to do, is to listen to the rabbis. The rabbis are not Satan. They are not conspiring. There hasn't been a Jewish conspiracy against Jesus. This is anti-Semitism. This is the Christian church trying to prevent you from listening to the rabbis, because they don't want you listening to the rabbis, because you will realise it's not true. They must get you to believe in Jesus, because it's part of their religious theology that you believe in him, because they want him to return, and they believe they need so many Jews. We don't quite know how many, but they need more Jews. They need more Jews to believe in Jesus, because they want him to return. And they're worried, we've got to have these Jews, more Jews in the church, otherwise Jesus won't return. You are just fodder that are being used by the church for their belief system. But the most important thing is you must examine your faith from a Jewish perspective before you make any decision. You must understand the implications of this belief system. You must understand it, and you must understand it from the Jewish perspective, because the Hebrew scriptures are our scriptures given to the Jewish people, and these scriptures are understandable. God is the God of communication. He communicates clearly, succinctly. You cannot fail to understand what God has to say in the Hebrew scriptures. He communicates so that any and every Jew can immediately understand. The concept of spiritual blindness comes from St. Paul, who, because the rabbis didn't agree with him, came to the conclusion they were spiritually blind. And this is what the church says: if you don't agree with the church, you are spiritually blind. They won't allow the Jew to have the point of view over their own scriptures. They consider that we are so dense and so stupid, and God is blinding us, that we haven't got the seichel or the common sense to understand our own scriptures. How insulting is that? Why would God blind his own people to believe in something so important? Because the whole point is everybody's supposed to believe in this Jesus. Everybody on the planet is supposed to believe in this Jesus. So if Jesus is the Messiah, it should be plainly obvious to any and every Jew who opens that Hebrew scriptures. And Jews have been opening up their scriptures, and very learned men have been looking at those scriptures for thousands of years, and they have not seen anything that alludes to Jesus. There is nothing there that speaks of of God, a human being dying on the cross, who is God dying, God's blood covering your sin outside the temple. God has said, have nothing to do with human sacrifice. It is an abomination. It is an abomination for you to believe in this Jesus. You're believing in a human sacrifice. You have to get this. This blood was the shed of a human being who the Christian believes is God. They believe is God. They could believe it was Mickey Mouse, but they believe this blood is God's blood. But it was the blood of a human being, and God has said, have nothing to do with human sacrifice. And that should be a wake-up call, because it was certainly a wake-up call for me. What a wake-up call. What a wake-up call. Have nothing to do with human sacrifice. And the whole of the Christian faith, that cross, is to do with human sacrifice. They believe it's God. They believe God kills God. He kills himself. and then he raises himself from the dead. How much sugar is that? I find that so offensive, so blasphemous, so shocking, that I want nothing to do with this ideology. And if you want to understand it more, you must listen to your rabbis. If you want to believe in Jesus afterwards, you can do. You can be Jewish and believe in Jesus. You can be Jewish and worship idols. It won't stop you being Jewish. It won't stop you being Jewish. The children of Israel worshipped idols. They worshipped that golden calf. But as far as God was concerned, they're still Jews. They're just misbehaving Jews, right? You're just being used by the Christian church to fulfill their ideology, philosophy, whatever you want to call it, that they want Jesus to return, so we've got to get more of those Jews believing, and then Jesus will return. This is what it's about. The Christian always uses the Jew. And if they're not persecuting you to believe in Jesus, they will schmooze you and love you to death to get you to believe in Jesus. But you must listen to your religious leaders within your own religion of Judaism. You have to consider what they have to say. You have to. Stop listening to this anti-Semitic lie from the Christian that tells you the rabbis are in conspiracy against Jesus. They are not in conspiracy against Jesus. I have never met a rabbi who's believed that. No rabbi thinks like that. All rabbis are open-minded and listen. They are thinkers. They're thinkers. Most rabbis have read the New Testament. Most rabbis have looked up all these prophecies in the Hebrew Scriptures. Don't you think they've thought about it? Don't you think they've thought about it? Or you think your own people are so stupid and so dense that they cannot recognise something that is supposed to be so obvious? Because this is what Michael Brown, the professor, says. It's obvious from the Hebrew Scriptures that Jesus is the Messiah. Well, I don't see anything obvious there. I can't find it. I cannot find it. And I was a Jewish believer in Jesus, re-examining thoroughly scrutinising those Hebrew Scriptures, listening, thinking, considering, listening to learned men and women. I was listening, opening my mind up, not just listening to the Christians, but listening to the Jews. Oh yes, listening to the Jews. The Christians don't want you to listen to the Jewish people. They don't want you to listen because they are driven and obsessed to get you to believe in Jesus. So I just appeal to you as one Jew to another. Before you take on board and get involved with all this Jesus business and Messianic Judaism and how Jesus wants me for something and all that, please re-examine your own faith. You are required as a Jew to worship God and only God and not have to bow down to idols. You are required to worship one God and only God. If you follow this Jesus, you will be required to worship him. You have to grasp this. You have to grasp this. I have to tell you because nobody told me. You'll be worshipping a man who the Christians believe is God. God does not take flesh. He does not go walking about. You really have to take this seriously. This is very, very serious. Jews for Jesus don't take it seriously. They take it as one big joke, and I've written to them whilst I was a believer in Jesus for 42 years and complained. They don't take it seriously. They think it's one big joke. But the belief that Jesus is God is a very, very, very serious matter. This is not a joke. This is nothing to make jokes about, which Jews for Jesus try and keep it all very light. This is a very, very serious matter. To suggest that God takes flesh, to suggest God kills God. This is a very serious matter, and there's no jokes about it. This is nothing to fool around about like Jews for Jesus do. You really must take this seriously. Do not allow yourself to be enticed with little songs Jesus wants me for a sunbeam, da, and we'll sing a little Jewish song. You have to realise this is idolatry. You have to realise if Jesus appeared in a Messianic fellowship in any church, the Christians would bow down to him. That is the Christian faith. It is worshipping Jesus. It is worshipping. It is bowing down to Jesus. And you have to realise that Christianity does not need God. It has Jesus. It bows down to Jesus. God is neither here nor there. Jesus is at the top of the tree. God is around there. They worship Jesus because they believe Jesus is God. And you as a Jew have to recognise this, because I didn't recognise that when I put my faith in Jesus over 42 years. And nobody told me. Nobody told me. Nobody told me. I was putting my faith really in idolatry, and I didn't even know it. So I just hope that you'll just keep an open mind and listen to your own people. Go to Jews for Judaism. Research the subject thoroughly before you start worshipping Jesus Christ.